Mendon-Upton Regional, Maureen?
Yes, all the time.
I don't see it showing up, Joe.
Should show up now.
Mendon-Upton Regional, Maureen?
Yes, all the time.
Oh, we've got a little bit of a lag.
There it is. You just keep refreshing the Mendon-Upton page, and you'll see MURSD Family Town Hall, August 5th.
I think I've got.
Right now we have 19 people watching. God bless every single one of them.
I see the graduation, I don't see.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep refreshing the page, Jeff, and you'll see it show up as one of the options.
Oh, live now. Click on that.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, I've got an old
Keep
Joe
refreshing
video.
the page, Jeff, and you'll see
Yes, I
it
got it.
show up as one of the options.
Yeah. Now I see live now. Click on that.
Yes.
Okay, I've got an old
Keep
Joe
refreshing the
video.
page, Jeff, and you'll see
Yes,
it
I got it.
show up as one of the options. And now 130 are watching.
Click on that.
And you might want to, so you don't get the
Okay, I've
echo,
got an old Joe.
you might want to turn down your volume.
Can we leave the Zoom?
Show up as one of the options. And now 130 are watching. And you might want to, so you don't get the echo. Okay? And now 130 are watching. All right.
Okay, I see Joe, I see Trish.
Yeah, and you guys might want to mute yourselves, okay? Okay, it is now 7:03. I want to say good evening to everybody. My name is Joe Maruszczak. I'm the Superintendent of Schools of the Mendon-Upton Regional School District. And tonight is a first of probably a series as we get closer to the fall of town halls that I'm going to be conducting vis-a-vis YouTube. And the reason I choose YouTube is it's great to live stream, and plus it'll automatically go to our district YouTube page. But I'm joined tonight by a few guests. First and foremost, my right-hand person, Dr. Maureen Cohen, who's the Assistant Superintendent of Schools. And then three people who've been part of our district reentry committee that have been really, really instrumental in helping us wade through all this. First, our nursing coordinator and also school nurse at Nipmuc Regional High School, Leslie McGinnis. And then we're also joined by the public health nurse for the town of Upton and also serves on the Upton Board of Health, Trish Parent. And then also a very proud, I think now, yeah, former Mendon-Upton parent who had kids go through our district, but also serves as our district physician, pediatrician, Dr. Jeff Lucas. And I'm really glad that you're here tonight to answer some questions, potentially, and also offer your expertise. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share some information. I want to kind of stress that it's going to kind of be high level information about the way our re-entry plans are shaping up so far. And again, some questions that you might have that might be kind of more towards the granular level, I might not have answers at this time, but I will do my very best. Please use the chat function on the YouTube page to put in any questions. You probably might want to wait until after I've done the presentation because I appreciate a handful of you that have given me some questions on Facebook, and also I've gotten some emailed questions, and I'm going to do my very best to address the grand majority of those questions. Before I start sharing some information, I do want to kind of give a quick update. I know I put this in the email to parents about the whole issue of the budget. We're in a lot better shape than we were, say, in April or May with the speculation around the state budget shortfall. So as I reported, we got Thursday evening notification from the State Department of Revenue and also the legislature that they've committed to, at a minimum, level funding from last fiscal year, from FY20. So when the regional school committee recertified the budget in early May, it was predicated on just level funding, no increase whatsoever in state funding. So right now, at a minimum, we can say that we've got level funding. We are still waiting, as the state is waiting, for any news of any type of stimulus package that would be used either to bolster the state budget for those lost revenues or specific funding for schools. And again, there's a clear recognition in order to open our doors, we are going to need some additional resources. And some of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight definitely point to necessary funds for, additional staffing, additional cleaning, bolstering potentially what we have for our nursing staff and also support staff and so on. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a share of my screen, and I've got a handful of slides that I'm going to just hopefully not present for a terribly long time, and hopefully they will answer a lot of your questions. So, so you know that this is kind of, we're coming down to the stretch. The state is requiring us to submit something by midnight on the 10th. And we do have a regional school committee meeting coming up the night of the 10th, where the regional school committee will vote on some type of plan. And again, we're looking for even more feedback from you as MURSD families. So, we're in this place where, let me just move this. I think it might be blocking the screen. We've had, over the last 3 to 4 weeks, a committee of about 70 members, educators, support staff from the district, but also parents, our administrative team, and students. And, we've had parents that have had considerable expertise, folks like Dr. Lucas. We've also had 2 other physicians that are also MURSD parents. We've had nurses and so on, a really committed group of both parents and educators really come together to kind of work through the real complex issues. And I can't underscore enough the complexity of how hard this work is in all the various considerations. So as you would imagine, a committee of about 70 people is not exactly easy to manage. So we've broken up into 5 key working groups to kind of look at all the multitude of issues around reentry. And first is academic programming. How will professional practices, how does the curriculum have to change? What are the supports and so on? A key one, logistics and scheduling. What are some of the changes that we would have to make as far as scheduling? Student life and extracurricular activities. I know I've gotten a fair amount of questions around sports and even things like busing or lunch and so on. Physical safety and mental health. Again, safety being our first precedent. What kind of measures do we put in place? But also the concern around social emotional health of our students, and then equity and access, talking about how do we ensure that we're creating equitable learning opportunities for our students, given some of the restrictions that we're looking at and looking at preferences, but also the staff piece as well is equally important. So I want to underscore this, and I'm going to be real transparent with you in sharing some frustration. This has not been easy work, and DESE, which stands for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, has been issuing guidance, but they've been doing it in almost kind of a piecemeal fashion. So a lot of the decisions that have been made or have to be made, we're talking about a really, really short time frame. So you can see things that are critically important. You know, for example, I'm going to talk in a couple minutes about transportation. We literally just got that, you know, guidance on transportation about 2 weeks ago. And that obviously in our operation has very, very you know, significant implications for what we can do. So it's been challenging, to say the least, but I think we've tried to be as thoughtful as possible about all of this. So as we did in the spring during the initial close down starting on March 13th, we've had really core values. And again, these are core values that are kind of offshoots of our district core values, which are in our strategic plan, that are really guiding our decision-making on what we want to do. So first and foremost, and this is a non-negotiable, is the safety, health, and well-being of our students, our staff, and our family come first. Plain and simple. And that's got to be the lens through which the most significant decisions are made. Again, I feel really, really grateful to have a lot of expertise within our communities and to have great partners in the Upton and Mendon boards of health, but we will make decisions that are based upon concrete data and research and best practices and recommendations that we get both at the state and the local level. Again, that third bullet point is around being very intentional about access and equity, and particularly inclusion, as that's a hallmark of what we try to do to include all learners in all programs. Active engagement and communicating with all of our stakeholders also is a key core value. Again, addressing academic, but also equally social emotional needs in every single model. The next one, trying to reimagine learning experiences for our kids and building off some of the lessons we learned in the spring due to our experience with remote learning is important. And then I think 2 words, be flexible, in knowing that we've got some uncertain times, unfortunately, still lying ahead, and we need to be flexible, and sometimes we might have to turn on the dime, but we have to come up with flexible solutions to meet the needs of our families and also to meet the needs of our staff. So the initial guidance, which came out a little bit more than a month ago on June 25th, had this continuum. And if you look on the far left, the continuum on the left, return without restrictions, would basically be school pre-COVID, okay? And really the vision around that will be once there's widespread dissemination of a successful vaccine and we can kind of get back to normal. DESE envisions that districts, depending upon where they are, really would fall into one of these 3 categories. If you look at number 1, that would basically be bringing all of our kids back into, you know, for lack of a better term, the new normal, with distinct restrictions and also safety measures put in place to ensure student and staff safety. On the far end of the spectrum, 3, remote learning, would basically be what we were used to in the spring, however, with some increased enhancements. And I'll be talking about that in a few minutes. And then in the middle is a model that many, many districts across the state have adopted, and that's hybrid learning, where you would have both in-person and remote learning. And I'll explain the rationale behind that. But in this initial guidance, DESE is requiring all the districts across the state to detail what plan makes the most sense, but also to detail information about what full in-person would look like, what a hybrid model would look like, and what full remote, with the caveat that you need to be flexible and agile due to the uncertainty over the coming weeks and months. And I can't underscore that. And there's been a lot of speculation, again, since we've been in this crisis, about what's going to happen late fall, early winter, when the flu season comes about again. Are we looking at a second serious wave of COVID? Or even worse, with this recent uptick in Massachusetts, is that continue, that trend going to continue? So I think we have to look at every single possibility. And from my perspective, and maybe you share my viewpoint, this doesn't only change on a weekly basis. It seems like it changes on a daily basis. So again, I can't underscore the uncertainty that we're facing and the degree of flexibility and agility that we need to have in all plans. So in that initial guidance document, the Department of Ed was very, very explicit to all stakeholders, and particularly the guidance to superintendents, to say explicitly, the goal is to safely bring back as many students as possible for in-person school settings. And again, thinking about maximizing student learning and addressing again, that social emotional piece, our students' holistic needs. And when I initially started leafing through that guidance document, the initial reaction is, wow, let's go through this. I really love the idea of bringing back all of our students. However, there was a caveat in there about the whole social distancing piece of kids coming back, where a significant part of that document talks about this caveat that I have down below of social distancing of no less than 3 feet between student desks. And the document kind of detailed some studies that were done that showed not a statistically significant difference if masks were being worn between 3 feet and 6 feet of social distancing in an indoor environment. And I can tell you that there have been a lot of communities, probably the majority of communities, that have pressed back against that, for the simple reason that there is kind of, the CDC guideline that has kind of been imprinted in us has been the 6-foot standard of social distancing. So I can tell you that the Mendon-Upton Regional School District, along with the overwhelming majority of school districts, is kind of maintaining that standard of 6 feet of social distancing in planning any type of in-person instruction for our kids. I hope you like my sign. I think I want to standardize that because I think it kind of honors, particularly in Mendon, our agricultural roots. So with that said, in thinking about 6 feet of social distancing, we are looking at classrooms that would look like this. And this is a classroom from Clough. And the guidance talks specifically about having desks basically in lines, in rows. And with that, in our case, 6 feet of distance, all going in the same exact direction. And also kind of getting rid of a lot of the other equipment that may be in the classroom. So again, I believe this is a picture out of Clough Elementary School. And if you're familiar, and if you have elementary students, you know, we haven't had desks in this type of formation for many, many years. Generally, students are in groups, and particularly at the elementary level, it's frequent where we've got classroom libraries and centers set up and so on. I'm not going to say at this juncture that everything is going to be removed, but I think we can count on, from a safety perspective and based upon those guidelines, a significant amount of the extraneous things in classrooms will have to be removed to be consistent with those guidelines. Another factor that has shaped our thinking is the guidance that the Department of Ed has put out on transportation. And again, we got that about 2 weeks ago, and they stayed consistent with the CDC guidelines. So the CDC guidelines basically say on a full-size bus, you can have 1 kid per seat. So if you were to take a typical large-size bus that the majority of our students are transported on, you can see the red dots on this diagram representing students. You're talking about 24 or 25 students per bus. And I know it varies based upon route and based upon the age of the students, but we do have some buses of upwards of about 70 students or 50 students. So that's something that dramatically affects the program of what we can do and the viability, short of doing multiple bus runs or multiple bus runs in addition to adding approximately $2 million to our budget that we do not have for busing. So I think that it's important that you realize that that is part of the decision making. I do also want to share kind of the flip side of the coin, and again, in looking at public health data. This is in the Boston Globe every single week, but every Wednesday, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health releases COVID-19 data for all 351 communities in the Commonwealth. And you can see where Mendon and Upton lie with regard to our total case counts, Mendon with 32 and Upton with 25. You see the total positive test case. Actually, it would be now within the last 3 weeks. I haven't pulled the today's August 4th data yet because it hasn't been posted, but you see the percent positivity. Again, this is something that we take extremely seriously, but the flip side of that is relative to many communities across the Commonwealth. If we compare our 2 communities to the other 350 communities, we are considered to be low incidence, low transmission communities. I also want to enter, and I'm sure many of you as parents are thinking about this, but something else that goes into the calculus in thinking about our decision-making and our programming. And it's really about this issue of risk. And when the initial guidance came out from the state and it was announced by Governor Baker and the Commissioner of Education, Jeff Riley, they also had spokespeople from the Massachusetts Academy of Pediatrics. There's also been major statements, from the CDC and from the American Academy of Pediatrics about the deleterious effects of our kids not being in school. And, in thinking about this time of year and the planning that we would be doing in a typical year, we always worry about what is referred to as the summer slump, the loss of learning. And now we're talking in a best case scenario, our kiddos are going to be out of school approximately 6 months. So the concerns about some of the academic regression, concerns about the social emotional impact of kids, and knowing that there's a lot of, even pre-COVID, there's a lot of anxiety in our society, but now the added layer and again, the stressors that this pandemic has caused, particularly in households where we know that there's unemployment and so on, issues around food insecurity. We've done, in my opinion, a terrific job in working with some families that have been in need through our food services program to take care of our kids, but also take care of some of our families as well. But that's another piece that has to go into the calculus in making a determination around what type of model and what serves our community best. So I share that with you because realize this is also a key part of the calculus. However, when you consider all of those things from a pragmatic perspective and thinking about our core values, the data, and the guidance, there are two tenable options. And again, strictly from a pragmatic standpoint around social distancing and the busing piece, a full in-person is not tenable at all. So the first of the two tenable options would be the hybrid model, okay? And the hybrid model is something that at this juncture, I would say the majority of school districts across our state are giving serious consideration to and are doing their planning. And under this, you would basically be separating the district into two cohorts, approximately 50%, so that students would go a full day, half of them would go Monday, Tuesday, half of them would go Thursday, Wednesday. You use that Thursday, that middle day, Wednesday, to do deep cleaning of the school, but in the morning hours, it would be a synchronous live instruction with teachers and their students in both cohorts, A and B, and the afternoon would be using for professional development and planning. Keep in mind that the two days of being in person, it would be asynchronous. It would be, basically teachers leaving some lessons and so on. However, for our students in need, there would be connections between, live connections between their teachers and the students and the households. So some caveats that I want to discuss with that, and I've gotten some emailed questions about that, would be splitting up the cohorts A and B. We'd basically be looking at roughly 50-50, splitting up the district alphabetically, but knowing that there needs to be some adjustments. And one of the guiding principles would be keeping siblings together on the same day. And we're certainly cognizant that, we know that there's households where siblings have different last names, so we would keep them together. As I said, all of the students would have a live synchronous remote day on Wednesday in the morning, and the teacher planning piece would be part of the PM. I should say that there would be kind of a cohort C or a third cohort, which would be our high needs students. So our kiddos that have significant disabilities and may be in some specialized programming, our youngest learners who might be preschool or early intervention, and our English language learners would also be prioritized for 4 days of instruction. At this time, I can't share with you, because they're still being worked on, the school schedules. And really the biggest concern is at Nipmuc Regional High School, because the typical schedule, students are moving from classes to classes, and it's the most complex schedule. But we also have the same thing at MISCO, but the MISCO advantage is the kids are already teamed. So we can have a situation where the kids stay together, and the teachers are moving from classroom to classroom. But the mindset of the school schedule is you want stable cohorts as much as possible, okay? So you want the same group of kids staying together as long as possible. And obviously at the elementary level, that's very, very doable because that's part of the structure. However, again, we have to look at a school schedule that kind of simplifies things, particularly at Nipmuc, where there are fewer transitions. So there isn't 5 or 6 transitions, but perhaps something like 3 transitions for our kids. So something else that I've gotten a lot of questions about, and I think this is really important for many reasons, but we know that there are parents who have indicated from the initial survey that they do not feel comfortable sending their children back, or there may be a situation where the child may have pre-existing medical conditions that puts them in a high-risk category, or they may be living with a parent or a grandparent where there's a potential high-risk category. So we want to offer this standalone remote option. And again, we are aggressively looking at different options. But something that we want to do is we are aiming to have these classes being taught by Mendon-Upton teachers, okay? And that is our primary focus. However, we need to, again, get some more concrete data around the number of households that will be doing this, a number of students. And then on my end, I have to have a solid sense of staff members. I can't underscore enough that we're in the same situation as employees where we've got some teachers that I know for a fact have the same pre-existing medical conditions, have the same concerns about safety and the same concerns about risks. And we are looking at making accommodations to have some of our teachers be teaching remotely. I think I can't underscore enough, again, this is like a 1,000-piece puzzle, putting this together in looking at how the numbers work as far as our number of students and then the number of teachers and how they correlate, okay? So in some cases, I'm not concerned. You know, for example, if I know I've got some 2nd graders and some 3rd graders that are going to be in this standalone remote option, and I have a 3rd grade teacher, that's pretty doable. However, if I have a situation where I've got an 11th grade student who is taking physics, you know, that is, and you know, it's kind of a standalone student, and I've got the physics teacher, Jim Gorman, you know, teaching face-to-face, we're going to have to think of a creative patchwork approach to meet the needs of these students. But that last bullet point, I can't underscore enough. Our students who are doing this standalone remote option, we very much, and I worked with the folks on our Reentry Committee on the Equity and Access Working Group. Our intent is to find every way possible to connect these students with staff members and with their peers as we progress through this, okay? So a couple other things, and these are just strict bullet points based upon questions that I received in advance. I got a question about the role of electives, and I've got a lot of feelings about this, but I do feel the electives are extremely important, particularly with regard to you know, some of the restrictions that we're going to have and the implications in classrooms across all levels of pedagogy. You know, keep in mind, something that we pride ourselves as educators in our district is there's not a lot of, you know, traditional chalk and talk and lecture and so on. And we are thinking of really creative solutions of how we're going to work with our students with some of these social distancing and safety measures that are going to be put in place. I can tell you with regard to physical education, there will be a push for as much PE outdoors as permissible, and that's in alignment with the guidance. And if the students are having their PE indoors due to inclement weather, it does have to be with a mask on. Music is also a significant challenge, particularly at the secondary level. So if you think about it, really what we do at MISCO and at Nipmuc is chorus and our bands are largely woodwind instruments. And the guidance says the only way you can sing and the only way you can play an instrument is outdoors. And, you know, and there's also a 10-foot distance requirement in between students. So there's going to be some challenges there. And I know our K through 12 director of music, Simon Harding, is really aggressively looking at how we shape things, and perhaps with some of our performing groups, a lot of our instruction may be done remotely for those kids, you know, for safety reasons. But we are going to look at a bunch of different options there. And then art, if you think about it across all grade levels, from our youngest learners up through the great work that Kevin Campbell and Allison Klisch do at the high school, there's a lot of sharing of materials. It's the nature of the beast. We're going to have to rethink a lot of that type of work, again, in the curriculum. I do want to underscore again this piece. I've gotten some Facebook messages and some emails about students with IEPs and support for these kids, particularly during remote days. We will ensure that there is both synchronous live and asynchronous support for those kids on the in-person days, and we will work out and share the specifics of that. Again, on a really pragmatic level, I've gotten some questions about things like lockers and cubbies for our younger students. They will not be used. So part of the restrictions, safety restrictions, will be students will have to bring their backpacks with things to be stored on a daily basis. We cannot store student belongings in school as we typically do. We are still working out lunch and recess considerations. However, kind of in broad terms, we are thinking about lunch could be doable in splitting up our students between the cafeteria and also we are in the process of obtaining 4 very large scale tents for all 4 schools. That's something that I never thought I'd be saying as a superintendent. Oh boy, the times that we're living in. But we are looking at that for an outdoor option. Recess will also have to be something that we're going to have to develop some protocols around social distancing, but also sanitization of our equipment in between recess periods. I've taken some questions about before and after school activities, and it kind of goes in line with the last bullet point. I think initially we are looking to have our schools pretty much as a bubble, almost like what the NBA is doing down in Orlando right now, where we really do not want visitors or guests permitted in the school. And I think with that piece, at least initially, a lot of our activities that we do, again, a lot of them at the secondary level, we will be putting on hold, at least temporarily, in looking at the progression of this virus. The before and after school care program, I have a meeting tomorrow morning with our director, and we are going to be talking about our numbers that we're looking at and the viability, if at all possible, about expanding space or looking at strictly limiting it for the 2 days of in-person instruction, which I would imagine a lot of our parents would be going with that option, but we'll have some further guidance with regard to that as well. So the second model that I think we also concomitantly have to plan for is the full remote model. And I'm very cognizant of the reactions and the attitudes towards full remote, but the Department of Education has put some more guardrails around remote, and the expectation would be, should a district opt for remote, and I think you're starting to see some urban districts, but also some even some local districts. You know, for example, within the last week, Northbridge and Franklin have voted to start the year in a full remote. However, the expectation is that it has to be more consistent and more robust than what was experienced in the spring. And by more robust, a greater sense of accountability as far as things like keeping attendance, more synchronous, a schedule that entails more synchronous learning between teachers and students, and then also the requirement of grading and being accountable for specific standards in all the content areas being taught and assessed, and again, with that grading piece. However, I think very pragmatically, again, predominantly at the secondary level, there needs to be a look to simplify the schedule. I know as a district, we received considerable feedback regarding you know, the complexity of students managing, you know, 6-7 classes at the secondary level, and particularly for a lot of the kiddos that were taking honors and AP courses, just how challenging that was. I think it also should be again, because we do not know the path, the trace of this virus, I think you've got to think about a seamless transition from either a hybrid to full remote, or full remote to a hybrid, or whatever it looks like. So that's something that, particularly at the secondary level, we're asking our principals, in conjunction working with their staffs, to come to consensus on what type of schedule makes the most sense. Some positive news vis-a-vis the full remote model that I'd like to share with you is we've made an investment in technology for our elementary students. Our two communities, Upton and Mendon, have received funding, CARES municipal funding, as part of the second COVID relief package from the federal government. So we've solicited our two towns, and we have invested in devices and iPads for all of our elementary students as well. And we had, to a lesser degree, some issues with some of our families in our two communities with regard to high-speed internet. So we've also, for a small number of families, have also invested in mobile hotspots as well. The last point I want to make with regard to full remote was, I think, again, part of the inconsistency, and part of, again, I think some of the inconsistency had to do with the complexity of the schedule and feeling overwhelmed. But again, I think part of a full remote also has to have the importance of the electives and the arts. Again, I think during these really challenging and really stressful times, our kids really need art. They really need music. They really need to have that physical education where they're up, they're active, and so on. So really the third piece around the transition to full-time in person is predicated on the improvement of public health data metrics, and then a wide dissemination of a vaccine. I had a mom who sent me a large number of questions, which were really, really great questions. Good evening, Michelle. I hope you guys are doing well. But one of her questions was about metrics that are being used for opening or transitioning to different phases. And unfortunately, we do not have those. So nothing has been given in the guidance or to superintendents across the state that specifically speak to, you need to have this particular data in your communities or data on your county or statewide. So I want to share with you that as a group of superintendents, and for the last couple of years, I've served on the executive committee of the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents, we've been pressing the Department of Education and Governor Baker's office to please give us specific concrete data that we can communicate with our communities. So we had a fairly good exchange with Governor Baker last Friday afternoon, and we are still waiting, hopefully sooner rather than later, to share some specific metrics. In thinking about, should things go well in an in-person model, priority in bringing more and more kids back in a phased approach will be given first to our early elementary students, generally speaking, because again, we know the challenge that remote learning is in any form. We also know that remote learning is highly dependent upon the household and the parents and where the parents are and what's their capacity and what are the stressors and what are their job responsibilities, and know that. So that, and again, in thinking about really the importance of reading and writing and all those early literacy skills, those are the kiddos that we have to target. I also would say concomitantly with early elementary, in looking at kids who are struggling, kids who have mild to moderate disabilities, also equally important in bringing them back. Then looking at upper elementary, and then some of those key transition grades like grade 5 and grade 9 also need to be part of a phased in approach to full-time in-person. Again, should we have clear metrics around the safety? And again, to be very frank and to be very candid with you, there is concern. There is concern about, again, not having those clear metrics and seeing, I think we're going to see within the next week, 2 weeks, in looking at some of the data, particularly down south, of what's happening in schools. And again, I get it. We are Massachusetts. We do not have the same COVID numbers with regard to, Florida and some of the southern states. However, the concern around what does the data show, and again, what is the risk and benefit of in-person instruction? Something I do also want to touch upon, I got a lot of questions around PPE or personal protective equipment for both staff and students. So what is permissible and what is in the guidance is whatever cloth mask is worn by a student or a staff member is permissible in the school setting. We will have additional surgical masks for staff and for students on hand. We've ordered enough of at least one per week for our students. We have also ensured at 3 of our schools, at Clough Memorial and Misco, every single classroom has a sink, every single classroom has a soap dispenser. We are going to, part of the training is going to be regular and frequent ongoing hand washing and kind of the protocols of what thorough hand washing is about. The majority of classrooms at NIPMUC, with the exception of our science and our art classrooms, do not have sinks. So in every single classroom at NIPMUC, we have installed hand sanitizer dispensers. However, in our other schools, we've also equipped hand sanitizer in all of our classrooms and also have large scale dispensers in common areas, large common areas such as cafeterias, gymnasiums, entrance points, and so on. Some of our specialized staff, like our school nurses or some of our specialized special education staff that work with students with intensive needs, or some of our related service providers also have some more intensive equipment such as face shields, gloves, and gowns, and so on. We are also equipping our every classroom and common area with disinfectant spray and also disinfectant wipes. You will also see in some of our access points, particularly in front office areas, protective plexiglass barriers. And then also we've invested for all of our schools in considerable signage and floor decals for very clear social distancing cues. Kind of reminds me to one of the questions, again, about the logistics in thinking about if you've ever had the joy of being in some of the MISCO hallways during passing time. And if you know where my office is, I'm kind of off where the 8th grade wing is. And during regular times, during passing, with a full complement of students, that 8th grade hallway is jam-packed. Having 50% of the school population allays some of those concerns. However, realize we're going to also have to work, on logistics with staggered schedules to ensure, again, we're never going to have crowded hallways, or, we're going to have, like you're probably seeing in grocery stores now, one directional movement in some of our hallways. So I do want to say something about masks. I've gotten comments, I've read, we've had about 1450 families respond to the initial survey that went out. And we do have some parents who have some concerns about masks. And I got, again, to be very honest, it's definitely not a majority, it's a minority, but concerns about students wearing masks all day, or believing that they weren't necessary, or it just wasn't viable. The guidance from the state is very, very clear. In order for any type of in-person instruction, all students in grade 2 and above and all staff members must wear a mask and face covering inside the building. I'm going to go further, and I realize in dealing with little ones, pre-K, K1, I'm going to say it's strongly encouraged as well. And again, I am thinking about our staff members, and I know 6 feet of social distancing is really, really, really hard with 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. And a lot of the work that our staff does across all grade levels, but particularly with our youngest learners, is very, very nurturing. And again, when you are dealing with a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, where, you're working on behavioral issues and so on, that is a super challenge. And I guess I want to stress to all parents that this really is about a social contract. And I will speak more about this, and I will be issuing additional guidance, but it really is a very serious public health issue. And, working with kids, with your children in advance before coming to school about the importance of social distancing and the importance of masks is super, super important. And, and I don't say this to be negative. I don't say this to be flip, but I say this in all seriousness, that if that is a deal breaker for you, and you do not want your child to wear a mask, then I strongly urge that you sign up for a remote option, because the safety and well-being of all of our students, but also the safety and well-being of our staff is extremely important. I do want to also note that we will be, with the district and the regional school committee, will be developing some very clear policy around mask wearing. We are also working, again, this is some of the details, but working in mask breaks during the course of the school day, and in all likelihood, part of the philosophy is going to be around every possibility that we can working with our students outdoors. And I think in looking at the data around transmission and so on, I think the outdoor scenario is more conducive to where we can give breaks. And I also mentioned that point again with some of our students who may be working with specialists, a lot of our younger students around speech language therapy. We will be purchasing specialized masks that have that transparent piece, you know, particularly with working with kids that may have speech issues or something of that like. Again, I think I mentioned this, but we also are aggressively looking at options for both outdoor classrooms and, as I said, large-scale tents for each of our 4 schools, again, with the mindset of what we can do to get kids outdoors as much as possible. I do also, again, with that first core value of safety, want to talk about some of the provisions in place that I think are really, really important. It's the game plan to every single evening to do a nightly sanitization of all of our classrooms, all of our common areas through electrostatic spraying of a broad spectrum disinfectant. It is a product called BioEsk, which is, again, a broad spectrum disinfectant, but it's also a green product as well. So we're looking to, for this purpose and the labor intensiveness of it, in all likelihood, we are going to have to bring on some additional custodial staff just for that nightly sanitization. Concomitant with that is the work that'll be done during the school day as far as frequent cleaning and sanitization of all of our high contact areas. So think about obviously doorknobs, things like railings and stairwells and so on, but also being very vigilant about student bathrooms during the course of the day as well. Something else that we also have some very explicit guidance from the CDC and also from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health is some of the adjustments that we need to make to each of our schools' ventilation systems. So right now we're in the process of working with both an outside contractor and also internally to change the controls on our ventilation systems so that there is a greater air exchange flow in all of our classrooms and common areas. To kind of, without getting into a lot of technical weeds, right now they are commonly set so that there's a full air exchange in every classroom once per hour. The CDC guidelines call for doubling that to twice per hour. So essentially the long and short of it will be our ventilators will be running additional time. Additionally, we will also be upgrading our filtration system to something known as a MERV 13 filter in all of our unit ventilators. It's just basically a filter that traps more particles. With that, concomitantly, it is our plan to also do ongoing air quality testing in all 4 buildings and classrooms to ensure that we know that we have that appropriate ventilation happening and air exchange happening. And then we've also been looking at use of alternative space. And if you have a child that's at Memorial or at Nipmuc, you know that during some of these warm times like we're in now, but you know, we can definitely have that in September, that top floor, that third floor gets pretty toasty, as does at that third floor at Memorial, as does the top floor at Nipmuc. So I think should we be in that type of situation, we are looking at both alternative space, using things like the Library Media Center or, open gym space or something to that effect, or specialized type fans, that you can't use like a traditional box fan and so on, should we have a warm classroom. So something else that I've gotten numerous questions about with regard to testing and contact tracing. To be very, very frank with you, at this time, there is no dedicated testing program for the public education space in Massachusetts. And to be really frank with you, I find that very, very frustrating. If you caught the news within the last 24 hours, Massachusetts is a part of a consortium of 7 states. Seven governors have banded together to come up with some type of rapid testing program for its residents. But again, the rapid testing program would be in the window of 3 days or less, but probably in that ballpark of 3 days. And if you personally have had a COVID test, or you have a family member or so on that has gone through this, there's a gamut as far as getting those results back. It could be 3 days, or it could be 5, it could be 7, it could be more. So that's an ongoing source of concern. The guidance does not have any measure such as random temperature checks, for the simple reason that research shows that there's a lot of false negatives and false positives with touchless temperature taking. So the game plan, and again, this ties in with the social contract piece, where you cannot be sending children to school if there is any, any symptoms whatsoever of a student. You can't load up a younger student with liquid Tylenol or liquid Motrin and send him or her to school. We will be sending out a daily symptom check, maybe initially through email, or also looking at some apps that are available. Really, it's just kind of a check to make sure students are not coming to school with any type of symptoms whatsoever. We received, within the last 2 weeks, a very extensive 19-page document about all of the strategies and kind of the decision tree about any situation around symptomatic students or symptomatic staff members, and in turn, what happens. And really the long and short of it, from a methodology piece, is any symptomatic student or staff member would be isolated and sent home ASAP. For a student, and actually for a staff member, we obviously would be pushing very, very hard to get the data around a test ASAP, and realize with any type of positive tests, we have to go to a quarantine. So obviously, again, this could have a significant domino effect in what could happen for specific classes or for teachers and so on. And that also, to be very frank with you, has implications for substitutes and for coverage and so on. So this is a real piece that, very, very candidly with you, is very, very thorny. Contact tracing, in the event that there is a positive test, that will be coordinated by each of our towns' boards of health. So I know I've kind of talked a lot. I swear to God, this is my last slide, but I've gotten some questions about what the first day is. And I don't know if you caught this in the news or maybe even on Facebook, but we received word a week ago Monday that there was an agreement between the state's teachers unions and the Department of Education to lower the day of instruction from 180, which is our standard, to 170, to have 10 days of training and preparation for our staff in thinking about all of these considerations. So in our case of Mendon-Upton, it pushes that first date for students from Wednesday, September 2nd to Wednesday, September 16th. And that has been something that has been mandated by the Department of Education. And I think that it is wise, actually. And again, what I'm giving you tonight is the high level overview, okay? Again, I go back to my analogy that this is a 1,000-piece puzzle, and thinking about a lot of the considerations and a lot of the training for staff, we really, really need that extra time. So I do think it's a good thing. However, I do want to stress to all of you around that flexibility piece, and that we need to change in a very, very short period of time. And again, if I was giving this presentation to you 10 days ago, I would have been talking about Wednesday, September 2nd. I think that there's things that could happen at the state level that are beyond the realm of our control in Mendon-Upton, and myself as the superintendent, working with our regional school committee and so on. So again, I think that I wouldn't be shocked if things change between now and say August 15th or August 25th. So I think we've got to stay in close contact, and you have my word that I will continue to do these sessions. I'll continue to get word out to you. But what I'm going to do, and it's going to have a very short turnaround time, is I'm going to be surveying all parents and all staff tomorrow. And you'll get something from me tomorrow morning. I will put a link to this YouTube video, which has an explanation. I'll also send these slides as well. And I'm going to resurvey people to see what is their mindset with regard to either this hybrid model or a remote option and so on. Because again, that initial survey went out in the beginning part of July. I do think that there could be shifting attitudes, and I think it's a constant shifting landscape as far as the progression of the virus. And again, I've gotten some feedback from parents and gotten feedback from staff alike about, again, what's the progression with this uptick? You know, they've seen talk about a regression from phase 3 to phase 2 and so on, and what's happening in the college and university space. So I think getting that most current data needs to, again, inform decision-making. I've also gotten some questions, again, from parents about commitment, and in making that choice, could I move in and out of remote back to hybrid or hybrid to remote and so on? I'm going to ask for a commitment of at least a semester. And again, not to be draconian about this, but realize we've got a lot of micro planning to do as far as balancing classrooms, as far as busing and so on. And it would become really problematic that, you know, after 3 weeks, we have a flood of 100, 200 students go from remote to a hybrid in-person type model. And that obviously could disrupt the balance and also disrupt some social distancing pieces. So I will be very explicit about that in the email and in the correspondence that I get out to families tomorrow morning. I do want to say as the last note, again, watch this space. We have a school committee meeting on this coming Monday, August 10th, where the regional school committee will be going over all of the detail of the plan and taking a final vote on the plan to move forward. Again, keeping full in mind the full flexibility. So I know I've talked for a long time, and I apologize, but I felt like there had to be a baseline of information that needed to be shared. And again, after August 10th, we will post the full plan with all the details, or at least as many details as we have at that time, to the MURSD website, and I will share that vis-a-vis email, text message, and also through our social media. So again, I am more than happy to take some questions. Wow, it's getting dark on my porch. Maureen, can you kind of help me out right now? And because I'm not on YouTube, but do we have any questions?
We have a couple.
Is it like 5,000?
There are about 5,000. I wasn't
All right.
counting. So what I started to try to do, with ones that were quicker answers, I was trying to just quickly answer them. But even me doing that, I couldn't quite keep up with all of them.
Okay, great.
That were going through there.
Okay.
So if I could just, I'll start with a few, and then my recommendation, because there are so many, is
Group
if we
them?
get some of the groups of them,
Okay.
and then we can maybe capture all of them into a frequently asked question document.
Yeah.
And
So
then we can get out, because some of them are going to come out when the plan is presented on Monday to the
Yeah.
school committee. So I would say a lot of them are just direct to the plan, but there are a couple other questions too that I think we want to direct to you right now. That's
okay. And also, just so you know, I will, within the next 24 hours, I'm going to create an FAQ Facebook page that'll be dedicated just to questions that you may have specific. And this is kind of the space where we can kind of get into the weeds about specific things. And again, really candidly, some of these questions I may not be able to answer here and now. I think I tried to do the best that I could with some details, but there's, again, every single one of these sessions, and I've had sessions with our staffs, things come up that haven't occurred to either me personally or our district reentry committee. So what do we got, Mo?
All right. Well, one of the first questions was just asking who was on the reentry committee.
Yeah.
Whether or not there's a question, are there scientists who understand the virus? So maybe if you could just give an overview again of, who all the working groups were, like the numbers, and then who's on the, steering reentry.
Yeah. So our working group, again, contained members of our leadership team, members of our teaching force. We had every single group as far as custodians, cafeteria workers, para-educators, ABA techs, people doing work with students. But then we also had people like, again, in this Zoom room with me, Trish Parent, who is our public health nurse for the town of Upton, Jeff Lucas. We had a couple physicians, one who is an emergency room physician at Milford Hospital, another pediatrician who's also a Mendon-Upton mom. We also had a parent who's also an infectious disease specialist. So, a couple parents who are also nurses. So I think the folks that we had involved have a very, very good understanding of the virus. And I don't know if you want to insert anything, Trish, or to put you on the spot, but I feel very comfortable in consulting with you and maybe at times using you as my therapist in having a good handle on the transmission of the virus.
Yes, I think that public health has been embraced in both the towns by the school district, and we are grateful for the hand-in-hand collaboration that we've been utilizing really since COVID reared its ugly head in the spring. we've never, as a community, felt like we were disconnected with the school departments. And I know that can't be said for every town in Massachusetts. So I'm very grateful for that. Having said that, I am on at least no less than 4 conference calls a week, Zoom meetings and conference calls, going over the very frequent changes in the virus activity, the science behind the decisions being made at the Department of Public Health, and the guidance that sometimes seems like it changes hour by hour, I'm sorry to say. As we learn more and more about the virus, we've tried to grow and evolve and change, and that will be ongoing. It certainly will be ongoing. And if I can just say one thing about the uptick that we've started to see in Massachusetts, all have seen that the infectivity rate has gone from a low of 1.7 to now up to 2 again. I didn't see the numbers today, I'm sorry to say, but it was made very clear to us that the Department of Public Health has multiple scientists and epidemiologists looking at that data, those matrices that you talked about, every single day, tearing through them, dissecting them to try to figure out if this uptick is what they consider a change in the baseline because we've moved to phase 3. And that we expected that. We expected a few more cases, certainly, or if it is indicative of something else going on. So they haven't come to conclusions about that yet, but that is ongoing. And I think you will see the governor really respond very vigorously to the science. He's been doing it right along. The command center is made up of all sorts of experts, and they all feed him with the information he needs to form his decisions and make his recommendations. So we will collaborate ongoing, daily, if necessary. I'm sure I will be in touch with Leslie daily when school starts. And we will be following whatever guidance has been updated to that point, and we will be yelling loud and clear if we feel it needs to be changed on the state level.
Thank you, Trish. What else do you have, Mo?
Oh, let's see. We had a few questions that were, it seems like things are planned in a way that we can't return to typical schooling until a vaccine is in place. Is that accurate? There are a couple questions related to that. So maybe you could talk about just the metrics and also, some of what we're kind of waiting on from.
Yeah, and that isn't necessarily true. I mean, it could be true, but I don't think it's necessarily true. I think part of this, I'm going to be very candid with all of you. I think part of this is a very, very difficult conversation in the sense that this is, again, thinking about my slide about balanced risk, that we're in this really, really challenging situation where we want to be back with our kids. And I know that you as parents and a lot of our kids want to be back with our educators, with our teachers. However, I can't look you in the eye, or at least look at you virtually, and tell you there's 0% risk. We're not going to have 0 risk until there's a vaccine and we've eradicated COVID. However, I think, again, this has been a very, very challenging virus with regard to the progression. And, I can honestly say, when I was having town halls back in April and May, I knew this day was coming. And trust me, I was dreading it coming. But I also, again, looking at that piece and talking about requesting some specific metrics about the curve, coming down to very, very close to 0. I think, unfortunately, today on August 5th, we're not at that point. And again, Mendon-Upton, like other districts, have to make some very, very challenging decisions. And I think you as parents also have to make some decisions, and we're going to try our best to meet needs. But again, I go back to the point of that I made, maybe 20 minutes ago about superintendents really wanting some specific metrics around the phased back in approach. And again, if we're reopening society in a phased approach, I think it makes a lot of sense to bring our kids back to that full education, that full in-person, also in a phased approach. So am I going to say, all in is a non-starter until there's a vaccine? No, I'm not going to say that. But I think we have to have some really concrete points around metrics of what is satisfactory. And then I again, to be candid, I think the testing piece is enormous. And I think we've heard that on a national basis for quite some time. So anyway, what else you got, Mo?
This is an easier question, although,
Thank God.
well, maybe not easier, but we don't necessarily have the answer. But a few questions about will there be fall sports? So if you could just tell them.
Yeah, I can
the
share
process
that.
for that.
So we, like all other districts, we have to follow the guidance that we have from the MIAA, which is the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association. We got guidance at the early part of last week that they are deferring the start of any fall sports until at least September 14th. And again, it's very, very speculative. I think like everybody else, they're watching the progression of this. I can only speculate, conceivably some of the contact sports like football, I quite candidly, I think it's a stretch. Could we be looking at maybe something like cross country? I honestly don't know. I don't have information at this time.
All right, we had a few questions that came up just about the outdoor classrooms prior to when you started to talk about how
Okay.
we're doing that. I responded that we're looking into tents.
Yep.
That came up about tents into the winter time, and we said we're looking into some heating, but we can't have tents if there's snow on them. So there's some pieces related to that. So we answered those, I think, and a lot of people offered to bring in wood and to help build. So I appreciated that too.
I love you mentioning
one question that came up one thing that came up is security. So how will we secure the outdoor class spaces? Because that obviously is new in our security plan. So that came up a few times as a question.
Yeah, again, that is a policy and procedure that we're going to have to work through as we get there.
Let's see. We had a few questions related to Spanish immersion. A couple that I had, what about the SI students? So there's some concern about, let's say our kindergartners coming in, and if it's hybrid or remote, how can we meet the needs to have them in this full immersion, and they need lots of exposure. That was one question. Another question I saw, and I'm sure, I apologize to everyone, I haven't been able to keep up with all of them, but another question was about, would there be additional resources related to SI to support this? Some parents said that it can be challenging at home, trying to look up things in Google Translate and support their students.
Sure, absolutely. So one of the things that, again, in the same vein, in looking for supports for some of our struggling learners and students with IEPs, I think we're also going to look for some additional synchronous online support for our Spanish immersion students as well, because some of the consistent feedback that we got from the spring experience is keeping intact the students using the language and practicing. So I've had the opportunity to connect with my friend Manuel, who is the Spanish language liaison education liaison from the Spanish embassy. So we've got some opportunity to bring on a couple Spanish language assistants, and in all likelihood, based upon travel restrictions, they're probably not coming to America, but they're going to stay in Spain. But we've started a dialogue around having them strictly in a remote setting, being able to connect with cohorts of SI students for that conversational piece, and coordinating that with our SI teachers.
We had some concerns or questions related to how do we plan to support families who have 2 working parents if we end up going with this hybrid or remote model. So maybe you could, talk about that piece and some of the conversations we've had.
Yeah, so that is a key concern with the hybrid model, where again, the whole childcare piece. So I think, again, part of our planning through the month of August and early September is going to basically be trying to connect with some key community partners for childcare options. It could be from some existing daycare providers, or trying to think about doing something creative within the school setting during those remote days. I can't give anything more specific, but again, that'll be part of ongoing surveying that we'd like to do to get that data as far as depth and breadth.
We had a few questions related to ventilation, which I know is your new specialty.
I know.
And one, we had questions related to ACs, how will be addressed, hot rooms, et cetera. But we had other questions related to whether or not we're meeting the DESI guidelines for ventilation. I did a quick response, but our response, what we can put in the text, I couldn't put as much as I know you can, give some highlights, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, again, as I mentioned, the DESI guidelines, and actually even before, again, the DESI guidelines were a little bit late, so we went to the CDC and again, the Harvard School of Public Health guidelines about doubling our ventilation flow, or our air exchange rate in the school, in each individual classroom. So again, without getting into the specs of CFMs, it's more along the lines of taking the air exchange rate from a complete exchange once per hour to twice per hour. And a lot of that just simply relates to how frequently the unit ventilators are going to be running. And then again, the second piece, as far as upgrading our filters and the filtration size, right now we're running about a MERV 8 filter. We're going to upgrade that to a MERV 13 filter, which is again consistent with the guidelines.
We had a question about, we had a few questions that people were asking, why can't we live stream from the classrooms? There were a number of different questions. Dave, kind of put in some notations, thank you, Dave Quinn, about some of the research that we found as we were looking at that, but maybe you could just speak to that.
There's been some ideas of like, why can't we do real lifetime streaming of classroom instruction? And there's a lot of pragmatic considerations with regard to what kind of cameras would you set up in classrooms. I don't think it's as easy as setting up your laptop or setting up some type of webcam in a classroom. And then I also think just kind of the nature of, live streaming and taping in a classroom, I think that would pose a lot of challenges, and I can say with a high degree of confidence that I think a lot of our educators across all levels would not have a high degree of comfort with it. And I can say as superintendent of schools, I would not have a high degree of comfort with that as well. So I don't think it's a very pragmatic consideration.
We had a few questions that related to students, and I know you addressed some in your presentation and they came kind of at different times, but students on IEPs or 504s. So one area of types of questions have to do with if we're in a remote setting, you know, how are we?
Full remote?
Yeah, full remote, not separate, but full remote, how would we be meeting their needs? And there are also separate questions related to how we would identify who would be in the, if we were in the hybrid, the more in-person. And we did answer that part in the chat, at least what the guidance was of the list from the state, but we can say we have a decision tree that will walk us through who the students would be, and we'd be working with parents on that. So I can kind of answer that question, but maybe you could talk about remote.
No, I think you're right on the money, Mo. You know, again, I think it is looking at the IEP goals and the accommodations that are necessary. And it's a decision that is based upon the intensity of need. Something that I didn't address, and again, this is getting a little weedsy, but you know, one of our game plan, and this is going to be part of our plan, is, you know, doing different types of assessments to see where our kids are in the beginning of the school year and where gaps are. So again, I think it's about intensity of need. It's about, you know, was there regression, or, you know, are we talking about a kid that is significantly reading below grade level and so on. So I think it'll be a very holistic decision.
We had a few general questions. I'm going to try to group them together that seem to relate to, so some questions about holding teachers accountable, or you know, what's it going to look like with grades? A lot of it relates to the academic programming. And I think that what I'm hearing and reading it is the essence of how is this going to look different than what we had in the spring? And so maybe, and I'm happy to, you know, jump in as well. There are set guidelines that we have to adhere to with the learning standards, with grades, with assessments. We're going to have parameters at the beginning of the year for assessing our students. We're working on how to have our teachers even give more feedback and give them the supports to do that. But it is going to look different than the spring. But if you could add to that, just to.
I think
some of it will come out in the plan that we're finalizing.
Yeah, I think the piece is you're on target that with a full remote, because the expectation is around grading and around assessment, around crafting lessons around power standards, or really those essential standards. There's an accountability piece for students, but concomitantly there's an accountability piece for teachers as well. And again, what we did in the spring was completely on the fly. It was literally packing up in the matter of a Friday going into a Monday, and trying to force fit a structure that, you know, didn't work with regard to, you know, 7 classes and a kid's schedule. And I know, you know, I've heard from parents, I've heard from staff members about the lack of consistency, and in some places inequities as far as experiences. So I think in looking at simplifying the schedule for both our students and for teachers, and also the expectations around things like attendance and grading and so on, that will inherently bring a greater degree of accountability. But to the larger point, it is very, very challenging work.
And I would recommend, since we are at about an hour and a half and I've summarized the large groups, and I'm seeing a lot of, I know I'm not hitting all of them, so I acknowledge that, but I know we don't want to be here till 11 either. A lot of the other questions are pretty specific to, you know, kindergarten and pre-K. And so I'm seeing Jan jump in, so thanks for that. Or we have some high school specific schedule questions, which are great questions, and cohort questions. But I think what we're going to do, we're going to be putting all that in our FAQ, grouping them, and then communicating that out next week. But I love this last one. If I can make suggest this as the last one from
Perfect.
Walker.
I want to.
Are there any plans to adapt the curriculum to be less test quiz focused? And that is when we go to our, and you can jump in too, of course, Joe, but when we go to, in a lot of our thinking is we're trying not to lose in this context our inspired learning goals that we have to empower all of our students to thrive. And this is challenging circumstances, of course, but how we bring in other opportunities is part of the conversation that we're going to continue to have. And we definitely don't want our students just in test quiz focused, and we want them engaged and active and authentic opportunities. But we're going to be working through this with our teachers to continue to improve in that area. But I don't know if you want to comment on that, Joe, and our vision.
No, and yeah, I mean, again, there's challenges with the restrictions of social distancing, but again, I think we still, I know, I shouldn't say think, I know we have an educator base, a solid base, a solid foundation of educators in our district that are really committed to crafting meaningful learning opportunities for our students. So again, you know, I'm a big believer getting kids outdoors and getting kids working on meaningful projects is super, super important. And again, we're in this really, really challenging space right now. But again, the optimist in me looks at it as, yeah, this is a crazy lifetime challenge, but maybe it's also an opportunity. And it's an opportunity to rethink how we do certain things.
We have lots of additional comments that are in there, and we appreciate everyone's input, and we will be collecting that. And again, I apologize for not being able to summarize all of them, but hopefully we hit upon at least the major.
Yeah, and you also have my word, and I know a decent amount of you are on Facebook. I will, within the next 24 hours, also start a Facebook page that's dedicated just to kind of Q&A, and also we will have a district-wide plan that will also contain kind of an FAQ type page. And again, we'll keep it dynamic so that we're constantly updating it. Okay, well, thank you very much, Mo. Thank you very much, Trish and Leslie and Jeff, for being here and for the work that you're doing on this critical work. And we will see you soon. Thank you.